Welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, someone I'm a huge fan of from the band Palehound, Kempner, is here, and my gosh, we have a fun conversation. More on that in 1 second, but first, if you'd like to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, Tristan Abraham, and he will get the message to me. Thank you, Tristan, for all the hard work you do. You can also find the show on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Turned Out a Punk on those platforms. You can find me on Twitter or X and Instagram at Left for Damian. If you want to support the show by telling all your friends about this podcast, letting them all know there's this podcast. Sometimes it's talking to someone about how this stuff isn't punk. Sometimes it's talking about someone about how this stuff is punk. You know, we have a very wide range of guests and a wide range of definitions of punk on this podcast. And if you think your friends would like that, tell them about it. I also play in a band. The band is called Fucked Up. And speaking of punk, we're about to go on tour with the band that kind of invented this thing. And debatable, but they certainly played a large part in inventing this thing. The Damned. That's right. One of the greatest bands ever. So if you're listening to this episode when it came out, go over to fuckedup.cc and check out the dates of those shows with the Baby Shakes and another fantastic band. Oh my gosh, I'm excited for this tour. Come and see us. Come and hang out with us and say hi. And see The Damned. Oh my God, the Damned. Oh, we have a brand new single too. It's called Show Friends. And you can order it over there at fuckedup.cc. All right, on to today's show. As I said at the top, from the band Palehound, Kempner is here, and I'm very excited for you to hear this one. L is someone who I became familiar with through their work in the group Palehound, and I'm a fan. And so to get a chance to sit down and talk to them, that is something I'm very excited to do. But also, I love the fact that 1 week on the show, or one episode on this show, or on this feed, whatever, it's Chris Estrada and I talking to Fat Mike about this stuff being punk and that stuff not being punk. And then here we are a week later talking to L, and L is not trying to argue that the stuff that got them into punk is somehow like the greatest punk stuff of all time. But the fact remains that they got into punk music through stuff that is not considered punk necessarily, or authentic punk, quote unquote, by a lot of people. But yet it led L to produce fantastic music, be part of an incredible DIY community, contribute to that incredible DIY community. So is it any less valid? That's what I'm getting at here on the show. I think that no matter what your experience with punk is, it's part of the tapestry as long as you're contributing to this thing at the end. It doesn't matter how you got to the party. All that matters is that you're at the party and you're a participant, an active participant at the party. Anyway, is this making any sense to anyone? Anyway, I'm rambling now. I'm rambling. As you'll hear on the episode, I get high and I ramble real good on this one. But I will tell you, check out the fantastic new record, Eye on the Bat from Palehound, available now from the fine folks over there at the Foundational Polyvinyl Records. Yeah, Foundational. It's one of those labels that kind of help build this thing. And you can find that anywhere and everywhere you listen to music. And then L is taking the show on the road with Palehound throughout the rest of October into November. So check out dates over on the Instagram for Palehound, on the internet. You put in, if you don't know how the internet works, you go to this thing called Google, you put in the name of the band, you put in the tour dates, maybe a couple other indicating pieces of information. You don't even need that most of the time. You just put in the name of the group and tour dates, and it all comes up for you. It's all there. But there's also Palehound on Instagram and all sorts of other places you can find out this information. All right, I'm not going to explain the internet anymore to you. I'm going to let you sit back, relax, and enjoy L. Kempner on Turned Out a Punk. L, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Well,
stoked.
I'm a big fan of your records, your music. Palehound's awesome, and I actually cheated and I went and listened to you actually talk about two artists that I'm sure are going to come up very
Oh
quickly in the
yeah?
podcast, and it's two artists that I don't think I've really had a chance to talk about on this show in great detail. So I'm looking forward to expanding on these podcasts you've already done on these subjects. But
Oh,
uh,
awesome.
I
I'm
got to start
curious to
off.
know which ones.
Yeah, I know, but I got to start off the way they all start off, which is how'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna put a disclaimer out there right now that I feel like my relationship to punk has actually really kind of been like an interesting road because at first I felt kind of alienated from it as a genre. I don't really know why. I think I just felt like at the time, well, so I am 29 and like the punk that I was like my current punk was more like pop punk. So
Mm.
like my first introduction to punk was like through pop punk and seen stuff, and I felt like I couldn't really engage in that community, so I always was like really into it but like didn't feel punk enough, like aesthetically, like I was flat ironing my hair and like trying to like wear the right clothes, but I could never get it right.
Yeah.
So it's like really funny because it's like my relationship to punk is like I've always loved it, but I've always loved it with this like hesitation. um yeah.
It was like I think retrospectively not a great period in terms of like on ramps for punk rock. And
Yeah.
this I think we'll talk about this in a second, I'm sure, when we talk about your first show, but Simple Plan wasn't Nirvana. They weren't referencing the same stuff, or like they're not Green Day bringing Pansy Division on tour. Like they were the stuff, it was a very commodified version of mainstream punk rock by the time the early 2000s kind of rolled around.
Totally. And I think with that came like this heavy emphasis on like aesthetics and hot topic and stuff like that in a way that I felt was like not completely accessible to me. But I loved the music. And I mean it's so funny because I would say my actual introduction to punk was Avril Lavigne,
Yeah.
just because she would talk about it all the time. And to me, at the age of like whatever, 8 or 9, who had no I had no exposure to like actual, like quote unquote actual punk, like old school stuff. And so I was like, whoa, like she skateboards and she wears a tie and that's what punk is. And so I was trying to kind of like, that was my intro. And that's when I would like first heard the word and was first like, what is this?
Well, it's so fascinating to think about how many more kids were exposed to straight edge by Avril Lavigne than Ian
Yeah.
Mackay ultimately.
Yeah. It's actually really amazing. It's totally true. Like Avril Lavigne was my gateway drug,
Yeah.
you know?
What?
Like I think the first time I heard the word punk was like the Skater Boy lyric, like he was a punk, she did ballet. I was like, what does that mean?
Well, because I've heard you talk about it before. You grew up with music around. What kind of music were your parents into?
Classic rock,
Okay.
classic rock with like not too much of the heavy stuff. Like the heaviest we'd listen to would be like Led Zeppelin, like
Yeah.
they didn't even really go into like Black Sabbath or anything like that. So like the heaviest was like Helter Skelter by the Beatles. So it was like pretty mellow. Yeah, like the Who and stuff like that. Can I swear on this
Oh,
podcast?
I play in a
Okay.
band called Fucked Up. You got to be
I
able
was
to
gonna
swear.
say, yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say shit like that, and then I hesitated, and I was like, "Your band is called Fucked Up." By the way, I love your band
Oh,
too.
thank
So
you.
I just want that's a good opportunity for me to slide that
Oh
in
well,
there.
thank you very much. I swear I wasn't fishing for that. I promise.
No, I know you weren't. That's
Thank
why
you.
I wanted to put that in there.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, but I guess going back to that, your parents' stuff, because Connecticut has, you grew up in Connecticut, right?
I did.
There's such like a cool history of independent rock music. Not necessarily, well, there's like capital H hardcore stuff, obviously, with like Youth of Today and things like that, but then also like Miracle Legion. And there's like a lot of cool kind of independent rock music. Were your parents into any of that stuff that was happening in the
Not at
80s?
all. Not at all. Like they were not. I love my parents, but they were not cool enough for that. Like I remember when I found out that my mom was the same age as like Kim Deal, and I was like, "How? What happened? How did you not teach me about the Pixies? Like, how did that happen?" No, they were not connected with that at all. I had to just kind of like find that shit on my own. And I had friends that were a little connected. Like it really, once I got to high school, that's when I mean there was that band. I forgot what they're called, but they were a Connecticut band. But like once I got to high school, that's like when I heard of, and this is not, I don't know if they define themselves as a punk band, but Ovlov. Are you familiar with Ovlov?
No.
Oh
Avlov.
man, you got to listen to Ovlov.
Yeah.
Ovlov. It's Volvo spelled backwards.
Okay.
They're a Connecticut band from Newtown, Connecticut, and it's led by this guy Steve Hartlett, who I've known. Like, so basically, I got started like getting into the my actual like intro to like my with my own like me in rooms where I felt like it was like a punk situation or whatever. That's like the least punk way of saying that. A punk situation was like when I started getting involved with like Exploding in Sound Records when I was 17. Have you heard of that record label?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's like back when it was, because I grew up in Connecticut, so I would take the train into the city to see like these shows that were at these DIY venues in Brooklyn, like the old Silent Barn and Shea Stadium and Big Snow, which was the name of a venue that was here. And these were all just completely under the radar, like totally, run by punks venues. And that's where I started like discovering like what the actual culture was outside of like the commodified like Simple Plan, like pop punk, like All Time Low. Because I had been to see like All Time Low at AP tour once, and then I like went to one of these shows and I was like, this is really different. But Ovlov was a band that I discovered through that scene, and they're Connecticut based, and it's still one of my favorite bands of all time. And that's when I first started like becoming aware that there was a Connecticut scene even at all.
It feels like it's always an inverse like this in punk rock when like mainstream punk or whatever is, being taken up as punk might not be the greatest thing. The underground is like really popping and stuff's really happening. And I feel that with that Brooklyn scene, kind of like towards the end of, the Brooklyn waterfront DIY venues, there was like just a lot of
Yeah,
cool bands and a lot of cool artists that kind of got into it through going to these shows that were just happening around there.
that's exactly what happened, is that I kind of just like got into that scene through my friend Sadie, who is in that band Speedy Ortiz.
Mm-hmm.
She's in that band, and she was like a friend of mine who kind of had an inn there and lived there and was like inviting me to stuff. Yeah, I just remember, I don't know if you know that band Big Ups.
Yeah.
That band was amazing. I remember seeing them. Yeah, all those, like you said, those waterfront like Williamsburg venues that are now fucking Vice offices. Like
I
that
don't think
was,
they're Vice offices anymore. I think even the Vice
are they
offices are
not?
gone
Oh
now.
God, it's such a waste. Fucking waste. But yeah, that's when I was like, whoa, okay, I get it now. I was like, this is what it is. It can mean so many different things, punk.
It's interesting when you look at punk as being this thing that ultimately destroys the neighborhood. Like, no, it's not punk's fault, but like punk will attract the next wave of people that will commodify it or try and make money off it or like it could be a coffee shop, but it could also be Vice. It could be an art gallery. Like it could be cooler things, but it ultimately takes spaces away from the people that live there and even the punks in the end. And it's happened in Toronto. It happens in cities time and time again. And it's one of those sad realities, I guess, of punk needing to just find space, but ultimately as the scene getting better and these shows getting bigger are going to be the harbinger of what's going to kill it off, because these things are going to move in that ultimately are going to get supplanted by condos. Like every
Totally. Exactly. Like the Vice office is just going to turn into an empty condo
yeah
or like a Google office or some
yeah
bullshit.
yeah
But yeah, that is interesting. And I've thought about, because I was actually just in Williamsburg the other day getting a slice of pizza at this place, Joe's Pizza, with my friend, and this guy sat down next to us, and he was like this like old school Staten Island like Italian guy, and he was like, I've been working for the fire department, for 20 years, and this block has changed so much, and I remember when it was all punks, on drugs, and now it's all these European tourists, and it's just like, and it, and it's like, it's true though, like
yeah
that's the really sad trajectory, because punk, even at its core, like I think like I'm using the word punk, but really what my actual association with it is like what I would call like DIY. That's kind of like what we were all calling it, I guess, at the time, but like, and still, um, but it's very fashionable. It's
Mhm.
like this thing that is not supposed to be. It's like supposed to be just this organic community thing, but then people see it as like that's hip, that's fashionable. Then those people move in, and it's the tale as old as time.
Yeah, it is. And it's also because I guess it gives so many cool, unique voices entry. There's just so many people that kind of come out of it, be it in a world like fashion or in film or in art, that ultimately bring other eyeballs towards it. That it's gonna, I don't know. Anyway, we can go on this forever, and we probably will get back to this. But going back to when you were getting into it, you mentioned Simple Plan. It was a Simple Plan Avril Lavigne show. That was your first show, right?
Oh yeah, it was.
A
Hell yeah, it
Canadian
was.
classic double bill.
I mean, it was just like blew my mind. What was so funny about seeing Simple Plan is that when I saw them, I had like, listened to the Radio Disney and shit like that, like at the time. And when I heard Simple Plan, I was like, that's the band. That's the band I've been hearing on the radio. Like that's that voice. But in hindsight, it might have been Blink 182. It might have been like any of those other bands.
Yeah.
But I remember I was like, this is that band. But I think I was just like, this is the genre that I've been hearing.
Yeah.
But at the time I was like, that's the band.
It's,
And it probably was Blink, actually, that I was thinking of.
but it was wild to me that because they got huge in America, Simple Plan.
Huge. Yeah. No pads, no helmets, just balls. That's classic record.
It's so funny because when that came out, I'm like, these dudes know better. Like, like Blink 182, it's arguable because whether it was ever known better than some of the, puns like that. But like with those, like I remember seeing Reset and being like, nah, these guys were talking a completely different game on stage back then. Like this is they're pandering. They're trying to get this audience.
Totally. And it's just interesting when you have like punk music on a major label and like just like the dynamic of that, where like the lyrics are about rebellion and being yourself and all this stuff, but it's like this highly glossed, like it's this glossy package behind. And I think that was like such a such a weird introduction to punk for me, because I was like, is this what it is?
But it was directly connected to it, right? Like Avril Lavigne had all her band were people that played in like local punk bands back then.
Is that true? That's sick.
And I'm trying to remember all their names now, but they were all like in these sort of like Oshawa area punk bands, and it's kind of like Sum 41 kind of came out of that, and it was like all people that were friends with Sum 41 who were managed by the same people that were managing Avril Lavigne, or same sort of network management company, and so they just kind of recruited all these people from like Sum 41 affiliate type bands from back then.
That's actually kind of nice to hear that that it stemmed from a community of sorts and wasn't just a complete put together label thing. That's actually kind of nice to hear.
Well, I don't know, because I heard you parse this. I listened to a podcast where you talked about Avril Lavigne. So, and I've never gotten a chance to really talk about it. And I feel not that I was like inside it in any sort of great way, but because it was just kind of happening in Toronto, it was fascinating to hear you kind of take it up and kind of try and balance the fact that it was this thing that was kind of organic and ultimately was awesome. Like it got people like yourself into punk. Like it was an incredible on-ramp. But it also is, like you're saying, this sort of gross corporate put together version of this thing that ultimately is awesome with good songs. So it's not bad and there's no judgment on it, but it is an outgrowth of this thing that's so anti-punk. In a way.
Exactly. Where it's like, yeah, my first concert was Avril Lavigne and Simple Plan, but it was at a giant arena in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Like where I was like, drinking Coke products and, it was like, and then, yeah, exactly. I don't know. And then I didn't really start learning about like, quote unquote, like real punk until I was like in 8th grade. And I had a friend who had like a cool older sister. And she was like Operation Ivy and the Misfits and Pixies, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like,
well,
yeah.
The guy who played bass in Avril's band on the first 2 records, or like, I don't think he actually played. I think he maybe played on the second record, but he was the guy who played bass live, certainly, and was in all the videos. Did all the DIY shows in Oshawa back then. Did the Propaganda show that I went to. Of course, his old band opened, but he did the Propaganda show and stuff. So it is like, I don't know, it's weird. That's the thing about this punk thing. Like, I've never really thought about but like that gentrification thing we're talking about, where ultimately it's going to lead to this sort of corporate monolith on top of it. That's what's going to happen with punk as music too. It's going to like lead to this corporate version of, but in the same way that maybe in one of these condos, there's going to be a kid who winds up doing a punk band. There's going to be kids that get into the band. Anyway, I'm stoned, so that probably is why this is going in this direction it's going. If you're following me,
I'm following you. Okay, I'm
good.
Right here. I'm right here.
Good. I was like,
I'm right next to you.
Is this going weird?
We're going.
Good. But it's I don't know. It's weird how the seeds for its own destruction are sown into itself. But that's all. It's like the Matrix. Like ultimately, it's going to lead to the next revolution.
Which is funny because we still see it. Like, look at Olivia Rodrigo.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
it's just like this constant recycling of like what was punk into the commodification of that, into a commodification of that. Like, it's so funny because you listen to Olivia Rodrigo and it's like she's like, referencing like old punk artists like Paramore, Avril Lavigne, and it's like, oh shit, this is what's happening, isn't it? And
Well,
I mean, I love Olivia Rodrigo. I love all that shit. I love pop, so that's why I never had an issue with pop punk as like a genre. I love it. You know,
I think that's something I've come to now, especially being a parent to younger kids and being
cute.
humbled. Well, it humbles you,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like you realize that like no, like it does not matter how cool your record collection is because they're gonna like what they're gonna like in spite of
Oh yeah.
that. And so whatever people like and brings them joy, who am I to judge? Like at one point, I remember just being, Simple Plan, come on, give me a break. Like, what are they doing? But you need that. You need Simple Plan. You need the Clash to do should I stay or should I go, or else you won't get the next generation of kids that are going to build that scene.
Totally. Because how are you going to hear about like how was I as like a 10-year-old in Connecticut supposed to hear about punk music? What the fuck was I heard it on Radio Disney.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was the only way I discovered music. And I heard like Skater Boy and was like, this something about this, and that's like the gateway. So I think that stuff is cool. I mean, I think like, I don't know, I saw Paramore like a month ago, and that was awesome. Just to like, and that was a band that I always loved but felt like not cool enough to, or like whatever for, like at
Hmm.
the time I like didn't have straight enough hair, I wasn't like seen enough or something. I always loved Paramore, and she was just like, so I mean, like she was talking about how like they had sold out 2 nights at Madison Square Garden, and she was like, it's taken forever, this first time we've done this. And I was like, that's fucking punk. Like this girl has been working for so fucking long. Like even though she is like has always been on a major label, like this is still like you can still see organic like punk ethos and like the heart of it in those artists. Like she's someone that I'm just like, man, she's just like been working her ass off and has been like staying true to herself the whole time. And that's cool.
Well, in a way, she's like and people are gonna definitely get upset when I say this, but like a Patti Smith of her generation, in that
Mm-hmm.
she's going to inspire a wave of people to get into this music.
Totally. And I saw her because I wasn't even supposed to go to that show. My friend and my best friend and their girlfriend were going, but then their girlfriend got sick last minute. So they were like, you want to come? And I was like, hell yeah. And I was like watching her and I was like, oh my God, I always forget that Hayley Williams is like one of the biggest like legendary rock stars of this time. Like this is like history. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I was just like, she's so important. I don't know. I know.
As we were talking about your parents being a classic rock, like this kind of music transition into the classic rock era, and the people that kind of get, like I never thought Blink-182 would be this big. Like obviously they were always big, but now they're at a stage where they're like, God, they're like Metallica big. But mind you,
They're massive.
Metallica's like the Grateful Dead now. So I guess it's all everything moves into the next stage.
Blink 182, I mean, especially, I mean, it's just so funny, like the Kardashian deification of Blink 182 recently, too. It's just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it couldn't
You
get
know,
bigger. It couldn't get.
no, that's about as big as it gets, is
Yeah.
if a Kardashian is dating Travis Barker.
Well, I was walking through. I took my kids to the movies yesterday, and we're walking through to the Barbie movie. We went to see the Barbie movie yesterday, and we're walking through the mall,
Awesome.
and every second shirt's a Kurt Cobain shirt or a Nirvana shirt. And like in American Eagle, they've got a Kurt shirt on one of the mannequins. It's like, well, this is the biggest band there. This is the Beatles kind of level. Like I
Yeah.
didn't see any Beatles shirts yesterday.
No. No, it's like this is the new vintage. Like
Yeah.
that's the thing, is that it's like this is the new classic rock.
Hmm.
Is like Nirvana and Def Leppard, all those like stuff like that from that like 80s, 90s that are turning into like t-shirts. I don't know if you saw that like Yves Saint Laurent recently put out a collection of like Nirvana shirts for like $4,000 or something.
Yeah, were they are they like remakes of the shirts, or are they like
They're
vintage? Oh
remakes. They're
wow.
remakes. It's just like this crazy. Yeah, it's
It's
crazy. And then you see
wild.
those like stores like John Varvatos, like these big designers with these super expensive like ripped clothes. I mean, that's always been a thing with punk though.
Yeah. Well,
That's
and
always been, it's turned into like expensive clothes that are made to make you look poor.
well, and
You
it's
know.
funny. It's funny because it's like the first commodity genre. People talk about
Yeah.
pop music, and I guess pop music there was too, right in the '60s. But Punk, it's like right at the gate, there's Sex the Shop, there's Punk the magazine. The name comes from a
Yeah,
magazine. Like it's something that was so cynical that it was completely rife to just play the game in terms of
totally.
commercialization.
And I can't think of another genre that has as deep of an aesthetic as punk
Hmm.
either.
Hmm.
Like just like the visuals of punk. Like I can't think of another genre besides like hair metal or something that like has
Yeah,
like that distinct of like a yeah, a fashion sense, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, and like very like like I guess maybe you're right. Metal, there's some delineation to it, and probably in music genres that I'm not as immersed in, there must be. But like
Goth.
goth, but like yeah, like but goth, there's like I can picture like maybe two or three different types of goths. Whereas
Yeah,
punk, there's
totally.
like so many people. Like you're saying, DIY to like straight edge hardcore to power violence to
To
like
like scene kids.
to scene kids to thrash kids to pop punk kids to skater kids. They all have like completely different aesthetics, but so defined that if you see one, you immediately know
Yep.
this is the type of music that person's into.
Totally.
Skinheads and like all that sort of stuff too, right? Like it's all like
Mm-hmm.
immediately definable and so.
Yeah. Mohawks, bright colors, hair, you know.
Yeah. Did you try doing bands before you started going to these DIY shows in Brooklyn? Like
Did I try doing what before the DIY shows?
bands or playing in music stuff?
Sort of. I mean, where I grew up, like, I was like just so not around things, like
Yeah.
there was like I played like by myself. I was like really into like singer-songwriter stuff like early on. And like the first shows that I played were like, well, I mean, Avril obviously was like my foundation, but then that turned into like, later on I started liking like Ani DeFranco and like Liz Phair and stuff like that. So that was kind of like the vibe I was trying to go for, like what I like had heard that I liked. And so I was like playing, but like my only venues were like local teen centers, where it's like I would like beg my friends to come. I had to beg them to come. I was like, please, you guys just like don't have literally anything else going on. Why don't you just come see me play? It's like, oh, my mom can't give me a ride. Like, like that whole thing. So it's like that was my whole situation. So like I could, and there were not a lot of people around me that played music that I felt comfortable talking to because I was like really shy. I was kind of weird. I had like a back brace. I like didn't know how to dress, like, and I didn't really start my first band until I was a junior in high school actually, and started a band called Cheerleader, which it was just me and a drummer. But that was yeah, my first band.
What was the vibe of that?
Kind of punk, it was just like me on good. It was very like, we loved like the AAS. That was like to me, like as punk as it got was like Fever to Tell at the time. I was like, whoa, it was like that was kind of the vibe we were going for. Was like just like no bass, just like guitar and drums, and singing.
And like I obviously wasn't in this scene, but from the outside, it seems like kind of that scene version of punk was very like dude orientated
Oh
and
my God, yeah.
for like as kind of like open-minded presenting as it would appear on the surface. It feels like a lot of the bands, a lot of dudes in bands. I can't think of too many bands that didn't have like cis dudes kind of in them back
And
then.
that's why I like brought up Haley Williams, is because
Yeah.
she actually gave a speech at the show where she was just like, I've been through shit, man. Like I've like, she gave a speech about like how they got to that point that they'd gotten to and how much she'd had to fight through just by being a girl. And yeah, I mean, I remember going to AP tour, alternative press magazine tour, when I was in 8th grade to see the bill was like all-time low, fucking the Rocket Summer, just like shit like that. And I remember just feeling so insecure in that environment because I was just like, I don't know. There was just like a bad vibe. And I think with that pop punk stuff with like those dudes in those bands, they were like, I mean, it's like notorious that they were all trying to sleep with teenagers. Like, I had and so that was a huge turnoff, was to me. It didn't feel like I was able to be in a band. It felt like my designated role was fan, I
Mhm.
think is really what that felt like at the time.
And I think that's like you brought up Haley Williams, obviously Karen O too. Like there's like these moments that you have these sort of breakthrough beacons, and then it feels like so long ago now, and it seems like things have changed in like
They have changed a lot
yeah.
because of those two, honestly, like largely because of those two women,
And Avril,
like and Avril and like Kathleen Hanna and like,
Yeah.
just like there, but like people who have like had to go through shit so that we can like, you know, do our thing.
Yeah, it was weird seeing Bikini Kill. I finally got to see him when they did the reunion. I never got to see him the first time around.
Saw them a couple years ago too. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
and
did
it
that.
was like it was amazing, but it was like this sort of like welcoming jubilation, adulation from the audience, like just like just such love, and just so contrary to every show video seen of them play in the '90s, where there were like obviously shows where they were completely in step with the audience, but there's a lot of shows that you'd see videos of or hear legend of where they're having to physically fight the audience.
Fucking crazy. It's like I saw Le Tigre. Is it Le Tigre or like I don't know. Le
Le
Tigre.
Tigre, but I
Le
like I
Tigre.
might be
Okay.
wrong. I didn't do well in French in school at all.
I don't know anything, so I'm gonna just say Le Tigre because that sounds good. I saw them last week because they just did their reunion tour, and it was so powerful to just see Kathleen Hanna, just to like see this person who has been like I like looked at her and I was like, man, like I couldn't be here doing what I'm doing without you. Like this woman is like that she's the reason, like that, like a huge part of that. And it was just, I went into it and I was like, that's the trailblazer. Like that's who did it. This is who like she like really started this on her own. But it was also a couple of days after Sinead O'Connor died. And Kathleen Hanna on stage at Brooklyn Steel started crying talking about Sinead O'Connor. And what she said was so powerful, where she was just like, that was the person who made me feel like I could do what I did. She was like, I saw this woman that was only this girl that was only like 2 years older than me ripping up a photo of the Pope on SNL, and then I was like, I can do that. I can, and then that was just such an amazing and profound moment because I was just like, yeah, like we've been like learning from each other this whole time, and like Kathleen Hanna learned from Sinead O'Connor, who took like the biggest possible hit from like being a punk. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just like
Yeah.
we're constant like women in music. I mean, not to go into like down that road like entirely, but like it was really really profound to be like, right, Kathleen Hanna was also inspired by someone who took risks and like fought against all this bullshit. Like she wasn't the first.
Yeah, well, and there's this group from here, Fifth Column, and finding out that they were inspirational on Bikini Kill, and like like I remember talking to Toby Vale for the first time, and just Toby talking about Fifth
So
Column, and
cool.
just getting like a new appreciation for this band that like, I'd seen their records and I knew they were important, but just being like, oh my gosh, like they inspired the group that inspired everything that changed, like the reason that zines were acceptable academic things to reference in university kind of comes out of Bikini Kill in a way, and Riot Girl and everything, and like it's so profound, the impact.
It is extremely profound, and it is also just like that. I don't know, just seeing and like also seeing how young Kathleen Hanna is still, where I was just like, man, you have achieved so much in so little time. Like the difference between like, she's 54. She said that on stage. She's 54. She ended the set by jump roping. I was just like, and she's at the end of a month-long tour. I'm just like, how is that even possible? But also just, yeah, being reminded like, damn, you're so young. Like that was recent that you were like having to fight audience members, like, and now I can play in a band and not have to worry about that at all, partly because of you, you know.
Yeah, no, it definitely yeah, there's just like these so many different pioneers of things, and there's a lot that obviously get acknowledged and get credit, but then there's so many that don't. To have this moment where punk is finally like Jane County is like the first punk rocker ever, and here she is, a member, like, riding at Stonewall. Now finally punk's at a place where you feel like her legacy will finally be acknowledged. It feels like maybe we're at a point where like there's a watershed moment for this genre. It's going to get better from here.
I think so too. I think so too. And you even see just like so many incredible bands like are always coming up that are just like, I don't know, like I saw Sheer Mag announced an album the other day. I fucking live for that band. I don't know. There's just like tons of it's just like, well, yeah, it's cool to just I don't know where I'm going with that. Or just like, but just yeah, new like groups of people who can be included in this, right? Where it's like even like Riot Girl, it's like that was so profound, but it's also all like cis skinny white women. And now you see like someone like that band Gloss that was
Mhm.
around, where it's like, you know, trans women doing punk, and then you see Sheer Mag where it's like, you know, a fat person doing punk, and just like stuff where it's like there's just still room to go and just more people to be inspired.
And I
And
think,
like,
well, and I think like you're saying, like there's so many, it gets narrowed so much in terms of genre, and so many stuff gets squeezed out that like the stuff of Sister Girl Riot that was happening in like the 90s in New York, that was like sort of a black women reaction to Riot Girl, and kind of like, you know, but there's no records, there's no, sadly, documentaries about it. It's just sort of completely unacknowledged, but it feels like this might be the point where you have acknowledgement come to some of these scenes, and that you can have the whole story finally get told.
totally. That is a
There's
good thing about like, you know, having like the internet or something now, is that now we can kind of like have these records that exist, and like there's it's more accessible for people to get their music out there and share it. And I think that that's like been taken a had a really good effect on things.
like you were saying with Sinead O'Connor. I think it only when she passed did I really kind of stop and think like, oh yeah, like the week, like she tears the picture up the week after on Saturday Night Live. I think Joe Pesci's on, and just cuts like the most hateful promo on her. There's like a bunch of skits making fun of her, and there's, now with social media, you'd know what she was going through, and there'd be sort of like an understanding of what she's going through. At the time, it was just sort of this attack on her, and you never really heard what that was like on the other side. Or, you know, she would obviously do these interviews that would be broken down to sound bites, but there certainly wasn't opportunity for her to kind of really express herself on her own terms about what she
No,
was
not at
going
all. Totally. And that's yeah, people have like voices and control over their stories now, which is good.
through. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, I don't know, it's like this give and take thing with technology and punk, where it needs it. Like it wouldn't have happened without the tape deck and the photocopier. And
Yeah,
you know, but
true.
it's, and Kinkos, like how many free zines were stolen from
Yeah,
Kinkos, you know?
totally.
Maybe it's about like finding those places in the matrix to kind of be yourself, I guess.
Yeah. We're constantly evolving to figure out where that is.
Yeah. So how did Palehound come together?
Palehound was not an intentional like thing at all. It was just kind of like I had was writing songs and I wanted to record them, and I was really inspired by I knew that I had some friends who were in a band called Ava Luna that I was like really inspired by, and they had a studio in the Silent Barn in Brooklyn called Gravesend Studio, and so I recorded some songs with them. And Silent Barn, like talk about just like an amazing space. Like you'd walk in and there was like a punk doing like a haircut for like in the middle of the venue. You know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah.
just like completely like that was like that place blew my mind. There's like a recording studio next to the record store, next to the barber, next to the performance art piece. Like, you know, it was just like so amazing, blew my mind. But like I just recorded a few songs and then I put them up on Bandcamp, and I was like just to show my friends. And I was just like, what's a cool sounding band name? Okay, I guess Palehound. And then that's when yeah, I started kind of like that was like my first release on Exploding in Sound Records, and then I was like in a community, and then I started getting like I was 19 when I put out my first EP, and I like immediately got press, which was lucky, and also in hindsight I think a little damaging. You know, I think that's like a little young for that. Um but yeah, that's how Palehounds, and then I was like, oh, this is like a thing that's happening now. That's crazy. I'm just gonna roll with it.
It's interesting how that attention changes you. And, you
Yeah.
know, like it doesn't have to be on like the Avril Lavigne hyper level, like any level of sort of like attention, it's going to alter the way you kind of like approach not just like your art in sort of a, you know, I'm not going to say it's going to change the way you make art, but it's just going to change the way you look at art, I find, like from my personal experience.
Oh my God, entirely. Like my first ever piece of press ever was a Pitchfork track review.
Yeah.
And that day, my fucking inbox, I was like 19. I like had no idea what's going on. I had like a full inbox of like booking agents and labels and all this stuff. And I just said no to all of them because I was just like, I need to learn how to do this. I turned down like a couple booking agents and I was like, I want to book my own tours and like learn the ropes of things, which I'm really grateful for. I'm actually impressed that my 19-year-old brain had that
Yeah.
instinct, because if I had signed with a big agent and a label and stuff, that would have just been I wouldn't have learned shit. And then I spent years like booking on my own tours and, doing minivan tours and sleeping on floors. And I think that was like so important.
It's amazing how many bands kind of got sucked up. And it's not Pitchfork's fault at all because it did
I mean, it
benefit.
kind of is.
Well, it kind of is, but
No, I'm
like,
kidding. I'm like,
I'm saying this as someone who benefited
Yeah,
from the Pitchfork system. But it hurts when they when they get that bad review. It definitely does not feel good.
No.
But the power that wielded, like unless you were in making
2013.
it was
Yeah.
crazy. Like
Yeah, it was
it was
2013.
unreal. Like
I know. They don't have that power anymore, which I'm actually a little,
I think it's the
grateful for.
last.
I don't think anyone should.
Well, no, but I think it's the last vestige of that kind of power existing to like
Like
make an
media
artist.
power.
Yeah, in that
Yeah.
way, like because critical culture is kind of not dead, but like it's not what it was.
Not at all. I mean, yeah, it's not at all what it was. And I think that like, yeah, and that was just, I didn't even know what Pitchfork was when that happened. I literally had no idea what Pitchfork
Then
was.
that would have been a shock.
It was a complete shock. I was like, yeah, my Dan Golden, who ran Exploding in Sound, was like, oh, there's a Pitchfork is gonna, write about this. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but that sounds cool. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, that was bigger than I thought it was. And, I got pretty overwhelmed. But and then yeah, it changed how I viewed music. And I'm once again really grateful that I like chose to do the DIY path. I think partly because I was inspired by the people I saw around me doing it. I think if I hadn't had that community, that I would have gotten totally sucked into, oh my God, this label, this. But I was so enamored and inspired by the DIY scene that I was like, no, I like want to pay my dues a little bit, like that's gonna make me a stronger artist. But that shit still like made it harder for me to understand how to write and move forward.
Well, unless you like, unless it's one of those things that does wind up being the lottery and you wind up taking off and getting a hit song and then just kind of, I guess, Avril Lavigne kind of career trajectory after that, you're going to need those skills that you learned from doing that touring.
Totally. Like we just started getting a TM like a year ago after like, and I've been doing this for like 10 years. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it's huge because now and I think it's like, I'm grateful for everything that happens now. Like we didn't have that huge moment and then it was like all downhill from there or something. It's like, I now know like that, like, wow, a buyout from a venue, that's crazy. Like, oh, like we can afford hotels on tour now. What? Like I think that makes the whole experience, even though it can be frustrating, like the slowness of it, it can also, I just, yeah, feel like has saved me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I feel it's like it's easier to scale up than to scale down into
Totally.
like I couldn't imagine having gotten used to being on a bus and then now to be back in the van. Like I'm glad I've
Fuck
just never
no.
gotten used to anything but the van.
Yeah, literally. I'm like, we've never bust. I'm like, that's gonna be, if we ever get to, I'm just gonna, can't even believe that. But we still have yet to.
I did it one time because I ditched fucked up and got on with the Bronx when we were on tour with the Bronx on their bus, and it's awesome. It's so good.
Yeah, I've heard it's awesome. And I'm like, but that's the thing is that I'm like glad that I'm like maybe someday. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of fun to have things to look forward to and to also just like appreciate that stuff. It's like we just did so much horrible touring.
Yeah.
Just like the least comfortable, like so many near death experiences, like just shit like that where it's like, now I can really just be super grateful for every like thing that comes, and that's a gift.
Oh, absolutely. Like to be able to kind of yeah, like I wish I was at that level that I would never have to fear going back to the van, but I was always scared of going back to the van. So when we would have had to go back to the van, we were already in it, which is
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm like, here we go. Like we haven't toured in like over, like by the time we tour next, it'll have been over a year. And we're working on the van rental right now, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm like look calculating the drive times, and I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
Time
Yeah.
to
Get
get
ready
time.
for lots of Chipotle and lots of
Oh
food.
man, weird
It,
smells and gas stations. But I love that part of touring. I'll say, like, I think like the bus, I would love to do a bus someday, but I think I would really miss like the weird shit that happens on tour when you find like a fucked up gas station and someone says something weird. Like I think I'd miss that.
yeah, you're right. You definitely have, like when we went to we nearly broke down on the last tour somewhere in Illinois that had a Let's Go Brandon store.
Oh my god, a store?
A store.
Like, see, that shit is dark, but also it's like, I'm glad I know that that's like you're seeing shit actually, as opposed to like waking up in a city and just kind of like going to the bougie coffee shop or something. Like, I do like being able to actually see what's going on.
It makes you realize that there's a bubble in every town of cool people, and you really appreciate those bubbles when you get back to them in each town,
Oh yeah,
because sometimes they're surrounded by not so great places.
totally. And it's scary out there. Like my whole band is like at this point now, like nobody is a cis man. Like we're all like trans or women, and it's scary out there. It's not. It's I have like going into a bathroom at a gas station. It's like shit like that does turn into a risk, and that is the one thing that would be cool to avoid with
Yeah.
touring. Is just like the danger of it. Like touring is fucking dangerous. Like not even just that, but like driving a lot is dangerous, and like shit like that. So that's the one thing that I would love to someday be able to like not have to worry about, is like our actual fucking physical safety
Yeah.
on the road. But like I do just like love the whole adventure of it.
I think that's a completely reasonable thing to want to divest yourself of, is worrying about your personal safety on the road. I think that,
Literally,
yeah, that's
we've had like so many near death experiences on tour. It's like insane. Yeah.
it, it's what you're right. Also, just on the traffic side of things, like how many of us are just driving and just the things you see, and just like how unsafe some of these drives are, not because of you or anything you're doing, but because of the people around you.
Yeah. And it really does give you like a good perspective on like, I've like, grew up in the Northeast, which is like in and of itself kind of a bubble. And it's like, no, this is actually like what this country is like. Like this is actually like what people like ingest on billboards and stuff. It has really like woken me up in a
I,
lot of ways.
and not to undercut America, because I think America certainly has broadcasted that terrible side of things a lot, but like it's like that everywhere. Like certainly
Oh
in
yeah, I mean
Canada,
Canada's not great either. You
No,
guys like
God, no.
I've been horrible to indigenous people forever. Like,
Oh God,
like
and Jordan Peterson, Gavin McGinnis, they were Canadian
yeah.
inventions that we
Yeah.
gave to America. Like,
Oh,
sorry,
thank you.
yeah, sorry. That's why we say sorry
It's
all the
okay.
time.
We've done a lot worse. You don't have to, but we've done a lot worse.
But you see it in Europe too, right? Like when you're driving in parts of Bavaria, and you really are like, oh shit, like there are cool pockets, and we are all interconnected little cool communities within punk, but some people are definitely surrounded by fairly adverse conditions to be in those cool communities.
And that's where full circle pop punk and punk in like the greater sphere is really helpful,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so inaccessible if you're not in the right place at the right time, so like that's just something to think about too, I guess.
No, you're right, 100%. Like in a way, it's like an incredibly privileged thing to be like, fuck Bikini Kill for having that song in 10 Things I Hate About You, because
Yeah,
you had access to them, but there's people that didn't, and that would be the first place they saw them. Like, holy shit, like that would have been amazing to get.
totally. Like I think that stuff can be so pretentious sometimes when we're just
Mm-hmm.
like, fuck you for selling out. Like I get there's elements of selling out that are just terrible, obviously. And but I think like that stuff to me doesn't really fall under that umbrella, because I'm just like, why not just like inspire more people and reach more people,
And
like
it
if
does.
you're doing something good.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. Like it does, right? Like there's you need to get these segments of the population access to music. And Avril Lavigne was talking about Dillinger 4 in Rolling Stone magazine.
Totally. I mean, and she was like, and also just like, it is cool to hear you say that shit about her bandmates being from like the DIY community, from the local community, because I could sense that in those music videos that they actually had a connection and actual like I think that was part of why Avril in particular hooked me, is because those music videos is like they look like friends, they look like a band, they look like people who love to play, and I really just like gravitated towards that like immediately. Like that was one of the things I loved about her first, was that she had a band that were like her friends and they were like fucking around in malls and stuff, and I was like, that's
It
the
it
dream.
it got so crazy in the wake of that Avril Lavigne thing blowing up that I remember like a couple of the dudes from her band, I think they maybe even had left by this point, but they did like a show in Toronto and Simon Cowell was there.
Unbelievable.
It's like, what the hell is going on here?
Come on, Simon Cowell. Yeah, I
Simon
mean,
Cowell.
there you go. It's like at the DIY gig.
Yeah, he
Like,
was just a few years ahead of his time. He could have been
yeah,
like really cashing if he had like done that now.
damn, that's true. That's true.
This has been awesome, Elle. And anytime you want to come back on this show and talk about punk or
Oh yeah,
pop punk or punk pop, you're always welcome.
awesome. Thank you. I would love to chill sometime. Are you coming to New York anytime soon? You touring?
I think we're coming maybe in the fall.
Man, I'm going to be gone in the fall. We're touring and we're trying to book a Toronto date because I love playing Toronto, but we don't have anything in October. Hopefully in like the next spring
It's
or
become
winter.
it's become harder to tour. Like that's the other
For
thing that I
sure. And like
it's like
crossing the border post COVID. It's just like, you
is it
know.
harder now for you guys than for in the States coming up here?
I think it's just like things. I don't know. I think I've heard we have always been really lucky at the border, but I think I've been hearing more about it recently from some people, and I think it's just like the border is just fucking always a bummer.
Yeah,
Probably way worse for you guys.
it's a crapshoot, you know, like
Yeah,
it really depends. Like I think there's obviously acknowledging white privilege and a lot of the border crossing stuff
that's
that we
fucking
deal with.
huge. Yep.
Um, but there's you know, not but also there is the just the luck of the draw, right? Like if you have a person, the more it becomes automated, not that I want to live in an automated world, but I find that the automation of it leaves less, oh, this person hasn't had a cup of coffee and they're going to fuck up my life right now, or
Yeah, or
oh,
this person has like is deeply prejudiced, or like,
yeah,
I mean, not for like, obviously we have like, yeah, the white privilege element, but just for other people, it's just like, yeah, they think the automation. I mean, I don't know, because automation also is built by people who have prejudice, and it's I think it's inescapable.
that's true. That's true. At least I guess you're not looking the person in the eye now.
No,
You're looking the robot in the eye and
who
just
was
hoping the
built by the
algorithm.
person
Yeah,
who would pull you over.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. It's not better, is it? It's even more dystopic in a way.
Here
It
we
it
go.
but it has like I find like getting shows. Like we haven't been able to tour the West Coast on our last record just because it's been impossible to line up all the
American West
venues.
Coast.
Yeah, the American West Coast because it's been
It's
impossible.
really highly saturated because everyone's trying to make up for lost time.
Yep.
It's competitive out there
And I think every
for those
band,
rooms.
well, and I think and every band that hadn't toured was sitting at home being like, "Oh, geez, what was that grudge over anyway? Let's just get back out there."
Literally.
So we're all competing now. It's we need we need more DIY spaces for us to play in these empty condos that they're building on top of
Literally.
corporations.
Why are we all competing? This should be like a I don't know. That's my biggest grievance with fucking music, is that I'm just like, can't we all like work
I,
together and just enjoy the just being around each other, and I don't know, whatever. Not to
I
be like end on a hippy dippy
no, but
note, but
I remember even saying to Vice, you know, obviously I was just like doing like a TV show and making documentaries, so I was not in any sort of high position there. But I remember saying to someone at Vice, like, when they bought the building, why the fuck are you tearing down a venue? Why not just put a venue in the bottom of your building?
or find
Like,
another building.
or like let them stay in that space
What
and
the
just be on
hell?
top of it. Like give it rent free. And so they don't, and like, then you're contributing to the culture instead of building on top of it.
You're literally like, yeah, destroying it. I don't know. That shit was so fucked. I remember at Death by Audio closed. I wasn't at the last show, but there was like Vice magazines just ripped up all over the floor, and like
It,
people would just been, yeah,
it was a vibe at, what was Death by Audio? What was the one before that that closed?
285 Kent.
285 Kent too.
Yeah.
It was a pretty intense vibe. And then
Because it
uh,
took away such an important few spaces that were just great places, like important, great. I don't know, whatever.
when it's when Vice,
Whatever.
when the Vice, because they like moved to that. I remember when they moved to Williamsburg in their very first office, going to that office because of when they were trying to sign fucked up and just being like, oh, there's a reason they moved here is because this could be like such a cool place. There's so many spaces for things to happen here. And then that winds up happening. And then instead of leaning into it or supporting it, anyway, this did end on a bummer
I
note. We
think
should
that's
have
so
ended.
crazy. Yeah. Anyway,
I
yeah, we
know.
should. We're gonna go off about this for like an hour.
I know. I know. Well,
Yeah.
anytime you want to come back and go off on it, though, you're always
Anytime.
welcome.
Just hit me up. I'm always ready to go off.
Thank you, Elle, for coming on the show. And you heard right there, Elle will be back at some point in the future to talk more about punk, DIY, Avril Lavigne, Simple Plan. I've never gotten a chance to talk about either of those two groups, and I got deep information. I could tell you stories about playing shows with Reset, pre-Simple Plan. Tell you stories about meeting Avril Lavigne when Skater Boy just come out. All sorts of stuff. There's like, it's not just punk. There's like pop music stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling again, aren't I? Coming up on the next episode of Turned Out a Punk. I think it's going to be a splits. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a splits. It is going to be a splits with Jerry A from Poison Idea and the biggest Poison Idea fan I know, Chris Menacucci, a.k.a. Cooch, from Radio Raheem, from Painkiller Records, from Righteous Jams and MFT, like so many incredible bands. We'll talk about it all next week on the show, but it's a fun one. It's a long one. It's with Jerry A, so it's got to be a great one. The greatest vocalist of all time. The greatest vocalist of all time. All right, that's it for this week's show. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives and issues of Indigenous peoples all over the world matter. We need to protect trans kids and help trans people protect themselves and their rights. And stop hate and violence and discrimination towards people of different sexualities, different religions, different cultural backgrounds. Because we're not talking about politics here. This is just basic human rights. People deserve to be able to live free from hate and violence and discrimination. So if there's organizations around you that are doing positive work and affecting positive change in this world, get involved. Get involved in groups and organizations that are trying to make this world a better place. I would add to this list of human rights things, we got to make sure that people have the rights to choose what they want to do with their reproductive systems. And so, yeah, get involved. Do something. Because right now the world can seem very overwhelming and it can feel like there's nothing you can do. And there's certain things that would be very hard for us to affect change on. But there are other things that we can affect change on. So, affect that change. Speaking about affecting change, if you want to do something that's punk scene, just do it. Start a band, start a fanzine, start a podcast. Maybe not a podcast, but anyone can do this shit. And this thing gets better once you get involved in it. So maybe it's just drawing flyers for bands. Maybe it's just helping someone put up flyers. Maybe it's just finding out if you can help out at shows or something. There's lots of ways to get involved. Speaking about getting involved, get involved with organ transplants. Poor segue. Sign your organ donor cards, because by the time they come looking for those organs, you don't need them anymore. They can perform miracles. I've seen it happen with my own eyes. I've seen miracles performed by organ transplant. And try meditating. Just slow it all down. Try breathing. Try relaxing. It feels really good. When meditating kicks in and you start doing it, oh my gosh, it starts feeling really good. And that's it. I have nothing else to say, nothing else to ramble on about. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.